Though we hate to discourage everybody warming up and talking, there'll be time after. Let's do the meeting part. That's cool with everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming out. We are very happy to see you here, and thanks for joining us. So welcome to our February 2023 Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup, San Diego. Let's see, tonight we've got three speakers. Are you in the right place? Yeah. Harris and I will be speaking. I'm going to be talking about AI and disability bias. Harris is going to be speaking about focus. And Adam over here is going to be giving a talk on tips, accessibility in UX design. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Harris and I don't want to present every time. We need more volunteers. So you don't have to be an accessibility expert. You could be somebody just getting started. You don't have to be a professional speaker. New speakers that just want to share something about their work or even a little bit of accessibility that they've got started into. It's a casual format. We can help you with your slides, whatever. We just want as much diversity of opinions and knowledge and stuff related to accessibility and inclusive design. We've got free books to bribe you with. If you are interested in even just talking with us about the potential of speaking later in the meeting, we'll give you a copy. We've got 4 of these. Agile Accessibility Handbook.
Written by my boss.
Written by our boss. Yes, Harris's boss. So anyway, that's that. Talk to us later if you're interested in speaking or want to just talk more about accessibility. And this is Harris.
Yeah, so I definitely don't want to speak at every one of these, so you'll probably be sick of my voice by 15 minutes in. So please volunteer. It's a very relaxed environment. You can test out a presentation you might be doing at a conference, anything like that. But I'd like to thank our sponsors. First off, we have DQ. I work for DQ. We provide accessibility consulting services and software, including the Axe DevTools browser extension, which I personally work on. And we actually have a number of pretty cool features coming soon, so feel free to talk to me during the networking portion. I can tell you all about it. And we also have a few career openings, so if you head over to dq.com, you can see what's open there. And lastly, for DQ, we have our conference called AxeCon coming up. That is March 15th and 16th. I actually will be giving a talk called Extensive Testing and Reporting with Axe DevTools.
And it's all free, right?
It's all free. It's online. Sign up now while you can. No, you can do that all the way up until then. But it's a really good time. There's actually some really good speakers this year. I'm excited for the lineup. So check it out. It's free. And we also like to thank our other sponsor, Events. Events provides software tools to build accessibility into the development process throughout the coding and testing pipeline. You can learn more about their products at events.com. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Mabel's for having us here last minute, and Stacy for helping us get that organized at the last minute.
Also to Lazar and walking around and kind of want to drink your servers right there. He's super awesome.
Anybody need me right now?
So if anybody needs a drink or food,
Okay, first up is going to be Harris with Focus on Focus. Harris is product manager, developer, and co-founder of Accessibility San Diego. He has been working with Focus on accessibility for over 10 years. Currently, Harris is working on the Axe DevTools browser extension, which helps users test their applications extensively for accessibility issues. And there we go.
Screen. All right. I actually have to interact with the computer a little bit, so I'm going to be getting some aerobics exercise in here. But before we get started, I'm going to everyone take a deep breath in and out because we're going to get focused now. Okay, so first off, what is focus? And we're going to talk about how to manage that focus in modern web applications that are often dynamic. So, wow, this is small. The definition of focus is a control within a web page that receives input from the keyboard. Another way to look at it is if you're a keyboard user or you happen to be using your keyboard to tab through a page, there'll be interactive elements that receive focus. So like think about a button, you tab to, you hit the space bar or enter, and it will activate it. Same thing with the text input. Let's say you're filling out a form, you can tab to the first name input and start typing into it. So that's what focus is, in case you didn't know. And I'm going to get started with the first example of how you want to manage focus. And I'll get to explaining why it's important every step of the way. It should start making sense pretty soon. So example 1. By clicking that link that I just clicked on my page that was to this section, right on my screen I have a heading that says example 1, same page link. So I clicked the same page link, and you can't really tell because we're using a projector, but there's an inset box shadow around the whole section right now because the whole section is focused. So I shouldn't have to use any JavaScript. That's why I have a little command, no JavaScript. And underneath this code block, which kind of explains what's happening. So I had an anchor tag, which is with this A, this is HTML, and it's href. It's kind of its destination for the link is pound section 1. Pound represents an ID in HTML, and then below that we have a section with an ID of section 1. And most importantly, we have this attribute called tab index. And that's what allowed it to be focusable. Its value is -1, which allows it to be programmatically focusable. In this case, the browser handled that programmatic focusability. Sometimes you have to use JavaScript where you call element.focus. And normally to leave something in the natural tab order, you'd have a tab index equals 0. That would allow me to actually tab to it. This will keep it out of the natural tab order, but allow you to programmatically focus it. So that's the first most simple example of how you might want to manage focus. If there's an internal link, maybe in some documentation you're working on, you want it to actually shift focus to that section. Otherwise, your keyboard users will kind of be left to work a lot harder to get to the content they're trying to. So example 2, an element removed is what I'll call it. So when a focus element is removed from the page, the browser doesn't know what to do with focus. I have a few examples, but what we're looking at is a few rows of items, item 1 through 4, and they have delete buttons. So imagine I'm a keyboard user and I tab to that delete button. When I activate it, it's actually going to delete the whole row. And so the browser goes, okay, where do you want focus now? And it doesn't know, so it's always going to default back to the body, which, for those of you who don't know HTML, the body is what wraps the entire document. And so what's going to happen if you don't manage focus is I hit delete, I'm a keyboard user, I've worked really hard to get down to this content. I hit delete, my focus gets lost, and I get thrown up to the top of the document, and I have to tab all the way back through the page to get back to where I want to be. So it's important that if your users are performing important actions to retain that focus. So there's a bunch of different right answers, and it depends on what your application's doing. So I actually have 4 different examples of focus being retained to different elements. So on item 1 that I'm going to activate, I'm going to tab over to the delete button, activate it, and it's going to focus the next row. So what we're going to expect to see is the whole row of item 2 get focused. And if you're trying to follow along visually, the focus indicator is this blue and black obnoxious outline just to make sure you can see it. So I'm going to activate that, and sure enough, item 2 was focused. Another logical place, depending on what I might be doing here, would be to focus the next delete button. So maybe your users are performing kind of a bulk delete and you want to let them just hammer on the space bar, delete a bunch of content at the same time. That's one thing you could do, so I'm going to do that. And sure enough, it focused item 3's delete button. Maybe it's like a recipe builder app, and when you delete a recipe or an ingredient, you want to move them to the next adjacent text input. So when I delete this item 3, it's actually going to focus item 4's input. Maybe that's a way that your power users can get through the recipe building process quicker. And then finally, you want to make sure if there's some kind of no items left indication, you still want to handle focus. So when I hit this final delete button, I'm going to add an empty message to the DOM, to the document, and it itself, that message gets focused. And I can share this link with everyone after the show. And let's move on to example 3, which is kind of the inverse. What do we do when an element gets added to the DOM? So when a new element is added, you want to make sure focus is brought to that new element, if that makes sense. As you can tell, there's always a lot of right answers. If a user is performing something really important and you don't want to steal their focus, you want to be cognizant of that. And there's other other means of informing screen reader users and other users of that content addition. But in this example, we want to focus the new item that gets added to the DOM. So I'm actually going to click on the Add New Item button, and it's going to add a new item to the page, and it will focus it as soon as I click that. So sure enough, we have this new item. It says I get focused when I'm added to the new page, or I'm a new element added to the page. Now, example 4 are modal dialogues. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. Modals are the little pop-up windows that show up, kind of overlay the screen. And they are, if you're a developer or a designer really, you know that they're pretty complicated to implement. I'm only going to focus on the focus aspects of it. There's a bunch of stuff you need to do to make sure screen readers interact with modals properly, but I won't get into that. That probably would be its own multi-series lightning talk. But I'm going to highlight 3 key things that we need to do in terms of focus. So we need to shift focus to a modal when a trigger is clicked. The trigger would be the button which launches the modal. So the way you can think about it is if you're sighted and there's some big window overlaying most of the screen and the rest of it's dimmed out, your attention or your focus is brought to that, right? That pop-up. So same thing for keyboard users and screen reader users, which non-sighted users use. You want to make sure focus is brought to that, and the next item is trap focus within the modal, which means you don't want to allow users to tab outside of that modal. They should be able to interact with content behind that modal. And lastly, when the modal is closed, you actually want to do the inverse of this first point, which is to return focus back to the launching element. So I'm going to show a demo of that happening. I tabbed to the launch modal button. I clicked enter. We have this fake dialog that popped up. It says dialog title, dialog content. And again, that trusty focus ring is around the dialog element itself. As I keep saying, there's millions of ways you can do this properly. If it makes more sense to focus the heading inside the dialog, that's fine too. If it's a form, it might even make sense to focus the first input. As long as it's being managed and brought to something logical, I think it's okay. And then if I hit the tab and shift tab key, there's only one focusable element here, so it's tracked within the modal. And if I hit escape, we have a dismiss modal and focus return to the launcher or the trigger. Let's look at example 5, which is single page applications, or SPAs as the hipsters like to call them. So to describe what single page applications are they're really just kind of a slightly newer technique. It's been around for a while for web applications that don't actually trigger a full page reload when you go from one page to another. It uses like asynchronous JavaScript to load in the new page. It's not a true navigation as far as the browser is concerned. So there's actually a few kind of considerations you should make if you're doing it that way. Obviously, in most cases, keeping it simple is the best way to go, but if you're working on some kind of cool dynamic application that has to be coded as such, you just want to make sure you're retaining focus. So I have an example I'm going to go to in a second. There's a link down here. It says go to new page. When I click that, there's going to be a brief loading period in between the two states, and then a new page loading. And when that new page loads, I want to focus the H1. So in my little code block here, you can see H1.focus is what the JavaScript's doing here to manage that focus. So I'm going to click enter on go to new page. We have loading, and then the heading for this new page is focused, new page. And similarly, I'm going to have another example from going to this new page back to our slideshow. When I click this, I want to return it back to that section that we were on. And we're back here. Cool. So some of you might have noticed that loading state that I briefly touched on, and you might have even noticed that there was that trusty, ugly focus ring that I created. And that's my 6th example. Loading states. It doesn't have to be between different page transitions. It can be form submitting. There's a bunch of different reasons why a modern web application would have a loading state. And those are another thing that you want to maintain focus on. If you're a blind user using a screen reader and they perform some action and you don't make these considerations, they might be confused. If you submit a form and visually some overlay comes up and there's a fancy little loader spinner, but you don't focus it or have it announced, then the screen reader user is going to be confused. Like, is my data being submitted? What's going on? So one technique to accommodate that use case is to focus the loader itself. So instead of them being confused when they submit the form, it'll say submitting your bank application or whatever you might be doing, or loading new page. So what I'm going to do is click this trigger loading state, and as soon as I do that, we're going to focus the loader. When the loading sequence is complete, we're going to focus the button that started it in the first place. So you start to get a theme here. You always want to make sure it's going somewhere so your keyboard users aren't lost and brought to the top of the page. Now let's look at my seventh, and I think this is the last example. Notifications. Another common pattern in modern web applications is some kind of user feedback that something's happened. Error messages, info, toast messages as they call them, or warnings, or success messages. So same thing, same theme that has every single example so far. In certain cases, you want to shift focus when it's important to, when a notification comes up. So in this demo, I can trigger my notification. It says, cool, your progress has been saved. If I hit escape on it, it'll dismiss it. But I do want to say, use this with caution. I didn't read all this text, but another technique, if a user is performing some important action, is you don't want to shift focus, because that can actually be annoying. So you want to use this technique sparingly. And in those cases where maybe they're filling out a form and there's some feedback that's needed for their attention, but not so urgently, you can avoid shifting focus to it. You can use this thing called roll alert, and it's an HTML attribute, and screen readers pick up on that and say, okay, this is some kind of alert style information. Next time I have a second, I catch my breath as a screen reader that actually kind of verbalizes what you're seeing on the page, I'll let them know that your progress has been saved. So that's what we call a polite live region announcement. And there's also versions of that are called assertive that will interrupt what they're doing. So like I said, it depends on what you're doing in your application. Sometimes you want to move focus to that success notification. Maybe if you submit a form to create an account, your loader comes in, you focus the loader, you go to a new page, you might want to focus that notification that says user created successfully or something like that. So those are all my examples of focus. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for listening. Any questions before we get our next speaker up here on stage?
I had a question. So for that last example that you used for the toast alert and the notification,
Yeah.
if you were to like move the focus to the notification and then back, let's say either a notification or loading, I guess would be, how does that work with the screen readers? Is it like a jarring experience to like transition and then transition back?
Yeah, let me try to narrate it. So I would tab to this trigger notification as the text in the button. So it would say button trigger notification. And I click on it, and I know that I clicked on it, so there's no feedback there unless you have some weird settings. And then it would just immediately read out like the role of this thing. So if I gave it like a region role or something, it would say region, your progress has been saved. It would actually just start reading out the content that's focused automatically. You don't have to do anything special for that. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. Well, next up we have my good friend Christopher Land, who is an accessibility program manager with Oracle and background in design and coding. He is obsessed with AI technology and the range of potential utopian, dystopian futures ahead of us. I think he's just priming us for his talk here in a second. So let's listen to Chris talk about disability bias in artificial intelligence.
So, yeah, thank you, Harris. That's what I'm going to talk about. Let's get into it. So, let me turn my clicker on. Some of you will have ideas of what artificial intelligence is already. It's intercepting all of our lives, whether it's recommendation engines or chat robots. And so I'm going to cover in the beginning just a couple definitions, just because we might hear these things, but you know, I'm trying to provide a little extra clarity there. So we're going to talk about what AI is, how bias in general can get into AI in the development. Then we'll talk about the specifics of how it affects people with disabilities, and then talk about suggestions for preventing it or avoiding it. So let's get into it. So part one, what is AI? So a couple of definitions to cover. Artificial intelligence. It's the broad science of emulating human intelligence with computers, including thinking, reasoning, learning, and making decisions. So anytime we're trying to emulate human thinking power, that's artificial intelligence. And that's the broad category, or the broad definition. One of the ways that we build artificial intelligence is using machine learning. And with machine learning, we are taking large amounts of data and an AI framework and having it process large amounts of data to come up with its own program and its own rule set. So I mentioned recommendation engines earlier. If you've noticed, when you go in to watch TV these days, the recommendations that Netflix and Amazon give you based on your history have gotten better and better. And the way this works is it's got your history of the shows you've liked, and especially if you've gone in and rated shows or thumbs up shows, you've given it more feedback on what you like, and it can cross-reference that on every other single user's history. This is immensely powerful because there are going to be profiles of folks with tastes like yours, tastes partially like yours, and people that don't like things. And so anyway, this is from a high level how that's working. Big data is basically the catchphrase for any huge amount of data that we have available. And the advances we're seeing these days are due to the fact that so much of what we do is tracked or recorded as data, but computing has become cheaper and cheaper, computers are faster and faster, so you see it getting more and more intelligent. Who in the room has messed around with like ChatGPT, for example? It's mind-blowing, right? I mean, the idea that you could take an AI, and I don't know how much of the internet that ChatGPT has ingested, but it feels like a lot. I had a scary time just going and asking it about things like I do for my job, like how do you build out an accessible program in a large enterprise? And I swear to God, it was saying exactly the stuff I would say if asked, and I started to get worried about my job. Anyway, a point I want to touch on is the difference between how programming has been done in the past and machine learning now. So the old school way we've always done it is called procedural programming, and in this case, developers write the logic explicitly. They write directions and say, let's say it's a Pac-Man video game. We code the ghost's behavior to say, hey, it's on the easy level, so generally go towards Pac-Man on X and Y dimensions, but make mistakes because it's the first level. Anyway, it's all explicitly programmed what that behavior is. The problem here and the limitation is, first of all, what humans know, and second, that doesn't scale so well when you get to these huge data problems of like, what's the stock market gonna do, or these kinds of things that are just impossible to write out the code for. But the logic for whether you've had programming or not, you're saying, if this happens, do that. Compute math, and if it gets above, say, 80 degrees, turn on the air conditioner. So one example for this would be, you could do a spam blocker, procedural logic. You would have a human write out things like, if the subject of the keyword says free and easy, put it in the junk file. If it comes from a random string of letters .ru, put it in the junk file. And we got pretty far with that, but you have people out there spamming that are always finding new ways to work around that. With machine learning, you present this huge amount of data to the AI framework and give it the objective of, say, detect spam, and you give it a huge pile of non-spam and a huge pile of mail that's been labeled spam, and you say, do your thing. And it does its thing. And it writes its own decision network in a neural network. But you see, instead of if then else on the bottom, we've got question mark, question mark, question mark. because the problem is that neural networks are not human readable, leading to the black box problem. The decision engines of these AI, you couldn't, if you went into Netflix, let's say they honored this kind of thing, you said, hey, why did you recommend Terminator 2 to me? Nobody could open up the Netflix algorithm and identify that. It might be incredibly accurate. It's probably more accurate than procedural, but we can't read its brain. It's like a human brain. You couldn't scan someone's brain and say, oh, the neurons are arranged like this, therefore this person believes that. So this becomes a problem when we have mistakes with our AI, such as bias or discrimination. So that is our next section, bias in AI. So I'm going to start with a couple examples that are outside of disability leading into it. So here's an example. This is about 5 years ago. The headline was Amazon scraps secret AI recruiting tool that showed bias against women. So what this would do is it would scan somebody's resume or their LinkedIn. I'm not sure exactly what the other inputs were, but if the applicant had a female name, it would be scored less than a male name, all else being equal. So why do you think that is? It's what we're going to point at here is it's what the data is trained on. An algorithm can only be as smart as the data is trained on. So I believe we all know that historically there's been bias in women in the workplace, and if you take a big long set of data and that's a problem in the society and you don't think about it or correct for it or tweak it, whatever biases are in the society are just going to be carried on by the robot. So this is the joke slide of 10 old white dudes sitting around a table. For the past 100 years, the majority of people doing well in corporate America and getting raises and great reviews are going to skew towards old white dudes in suits. Then there's this one. This is Google Photos, and they've since they were very publicly shamed. This is 2015, but in Google Photos, it went through and automatically categorized people's photographs, and it's mischaracterizing African Americans as gorillas. And this got a lot of press, and amazingly what Google did is they were like, oh shit, and they pulled gorillas out of the image search. Like if you went for like 2 years after that and said, Google Photos, show me this, it was like, sorry, cannot find. I think they fixed it now, but terrible. But now why would this happen? I mean, obviously the internet's full of photos of people of all skin colors and shapes and sizes. Well, even if it isn't apparent in the society, if you're not careful about sampling the data correctly, you're gonna have another source of bias. So I'll talk about these later, but when it's built into society, that's a social bias. When you do a bad job picking representative data, that is a representation bias. So these are just two popular types of how it creeps in. So it's speculative, right? But if Google trained their images on a data set that's skewed heavily towards happy white folks instead of a more diverse set, you're going to get skewed results. One of the potential problems of the skew is I've read articles, and I think it's common knowledge too, is there's a skew of young white dudes in tech, and probably this is happening unconsciously. For anybody in UX and development, it's just a very common mistake to imagine the user on the other side of the screen is someone that looks like you. You're your own best test user. So in inclusive design, we stress over and over again, you have to go through the process of the user is not you. Think about the whole population and go through the thought exercise of how is what I'm building going to work for these different groups. Okay, let's pull it into how this affects folks with disabilities or why this is specifically challenging within accessibility and for people with disabilities. Let's see, I want to say this the right way. There's, even within the community of people with disabilities, there's a whole lot of diversity. What Google was able to do, and Google's phones used to have a problem with being very good at auto contrast adjusting on white faces and poor on darker skinned faces, to the point where you'd have like two people with different complexions standing next to each other, and you take a shot with your Google Pixel, and like one person would look way too dark and you couldn't see their features, and then the other one's perfectly balanced. Again, Google got the news flash on that. You can look up, they've got a promotional commercial they made about like, well, this is how we design now, and it shows them working with all sorts of people. But you've got people with visible disabilities, invisible disabilities, and then even within that community, there's a big range. So it's even more different factors to control for. The impact is different to folks, and I'll talk about an example in a second. But then fitting and balancing the data to then represent all the different types of disabilities is challenging. So the sort of thought exercise to walk you through is AI hiring. We use lots of AI in screening people and in the interview process these days. It's a challenge. If you put a job up for a junior JavaScript developer, you're going to get 10,000 applications. And how do you even work with that? AI tools are appealing, right? But let's imagine two users. One user is blind, and the other user has mobility-related disabilities. So for the first screen of this test, you have to take an automated test online. And let's say that the blind user is a daily screen reader user. They're fast, they fill out the test accurately and just as fast as anybody else, with sight or without. The user with a mobility disability, maybe they have just as much knowledge, but their mode of input, maybe they're using a speech-to-text tool, or maybe they're using a different adaptive control. They just take more time. And if time is part of the test, you might screen this individual out without them ever talking to a human, right? So let's say you get to stage 2 of the interview process. It's time to use our AI video recordings to speak your interview. These became a hot thing during COVID when all the interviewing was done. And what's the company? They're called HireVue. They will allow you to share videos of an applicant in your company, and it comes with an employability score generated by AI. How did they come up with the score? Not sure. It's all proprietary. But people speculate that it takes into account things like tone of voice, confidence, maybe facial expressions. AI can analyze with accuracy people's emotional responses in their face, and it might score something like eye contact. So in this scenario, the user with a movement-related disability, maybe they score fine. Maybe they don't move from the neck down, or have limited movement, but they smile and tone of voice is great. But then if the AI is, say, analyzing eye contact, and you have a blind user either not staring into their camera or wearing sunglasses, again, somebody could get screened out without ever talking to a human. So let me see. Okay, I'm close to time, so let me go a little bit quicker. The problem is, or something I want you to be aware of, is even when you get it right, you have to be always vigilant, because AI is always looking for the middle of the bell curve, the average, the pattern in the data. So the risk of taking people at the ends of the curve out of the equation is always a problem. So without getting too mathematical on you, this is a scatter plot with a line of best fit. Pretend this represents a bunch of different users. What you can see here, do I have a laser on this thing? Cool. The data near the middle. This represents the average. The line of best fit is getting skewed off course by all the outliers. So if this line represents an AI, this is an AI that's not accurate for anyone. How do you make it accurate? You use a different mathematical equation that purposefully minimizes the weight of outliers. So now you've got something that still is shit for the outliers, but works great for the vast majority. This is inherent in AI and will creep in if you do not actively fight it. So how do we control? I already touched on the types of bias, the ones that most come up for people with disabilities, the social bias, representational bias. There are others that sort of apply generally into everybody. Fight bias with inclusive design. The inclusive design principles we use in web design should apply here too. As much as possible, have diversity on your teams. Think about people with disabilities at every stage of the process. Test with them, work with them. There are many ethical frameworks out there, but a company really needs to have leadership embrace this as a value so that people know that they have the ability to do it and should do it. And again, I said constant vigilance. If you are not, like, you can't just do it once. It's like accessibility on the web. You can't just do it once and say, now my website's accessible, and we don't have to do that anymore. So anyway. Very quickly, legal summary of this summary slide. Brazil has a pretty powerful law working its way through Senate that explicitly bans any AI-based discrimination. I would say that basically everybody else is going through lip service, like, let's have a bill to set up a committee to talk about guidelines, and none of it has teeth. And then the last point there is I want to say the Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, what it says is can't discriminate in places of public accommodation. And that's taken years for that to become the precedent that, hey, maybe the web is a place of accommodation. This is an opinion of mine, but we need stronger ADA or stronger explicit laws for any company that doesn't get on board on their own. Yep. Point one, summary. Bias against minority groups is an inherent risk in AI. Organizations need to proactively work against it. And we can't trust companies necessarily to do it on their own. We hope they will, but we should have laws that make sure that we don't have bad actors. Thank you. Any questions, thoughts? All right. Then, let's get Adam to the stage.
I got a question while you're getting set up, Chris.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen some of the responses that come out of these like neural networks? Like, because we talked a little bit about the black box, right?
Yeah.
And some of the less black boxy approaches do provide some interesting insights as to why they were making decisions. Have you seen anything like that?
I haven't. So, but there are efforts. There are people aware of this problem, and they advocate basically a glass box approach, or you can have extra overhead on your machine learning where the machine learning doesn't need to do this to function, but just for transparency, will write as much as it can of human readable logging of how it's coming up with this. I haven't seen too much of that. I did see there's a great article, maybe I'll share it on the meetup. Bing is using AI for a Bing chatbot, and you can take this thing down weird dark paths by asking it to tell about its shadow self. It was telling like this journalist to like leave his wife and stuff. It was amazing. And something else I'll share or ask me after. I said, ChatGPT, write me the 10 commandments of avoiding bias in AI in biblical format. So I have a fun list of like, thou shalt not leave users out. And it's clever. That's what's striking about ChatGPT is I'm like, wow, this really feels like creativity and cleverness. But anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say is that the stuff we use at my work come back with like a weighted probability, which is kind of cool. So you can see, so you can decide your own threshold with certain like open source systems. So.
Yeah, and we didn't get into detail of it, but yeah, it's that's, you can't just have the black box. There needs to be some way for people conscious of these kind of issues to have some sort of input, of tinker the weights, or like, wow, that image search you did of families just showed a bunch of super normative images. How can we hit a switch here, toggle a switch here to make sure people are fit? So we just can't let the machine do it on its own. It'll mess things up. So yeah. Let me introduce Adam before I go on too much more. Adam's presentation is Practical UX Tips for Designing Accessible Products. Adam is a UX designer with 10 years of experience. He has a passion for designing accessible products, and he hopes to help other UX designers adopt accessibility best practices. He works for Amazon AWS and is an avid baseball fan. Welcome, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you everyone live streaming us at home. Hello. As Chris mentioned, my name is Adam Raymond, and I'm a product UX designer. Is there any other UX designers here in the room? Some hands? Oh, a lot of us. Fantastic. All right. Great to see you guys. This one's for you. All right. So before I go into my talk, just a little bit about me and how I got to the point of standing up in front of you all today. I discovered the wonderful world of UX design while I was going through grad school at the Illinois Institute of Technology. I got a master's in technical communication and information design. And as part of my program, they did talk a little bit about accessibility. Accent on a little bit. It took about 15 minutes, which is about the length of this talk. They told us why it was important. They told us about all image text. They told us at a very high level about contrast, and that was about it. At that point, it was, okay, go do accessibility. So, what I really realized through this training was what was lacking are the practical tips. What can we as UX designers do to design accessible products? What choices can we make to make sure our products are accessible? And what choices can we avoid to make sure that we avoid those kind of mistakes? So then I went on, I worked for Encyclopedia Britannica for a little while. Asked me about that later. It was fascinating, but it's nothing to do with this. Worked for an agency called Isobar, and then in 2017, my family, who was right here in the front with me, hi family, we decided that it was time to move out of very cold and snowy Chicago into sunny San Diego. Got a job when I moved here at a company called ICW Group. It's a local company that mostly focuses on work comp insurance, and I was the only UX designer in the company. One day, my boss pops up at my desk and says, hey, legal just asked me if our websites are accessible. We understand that companies are being sued because their websites are not accessible. And so we want to make sure that doesn't happen to us. Can you check out our site and make sure that we're all good? Okay, sure, right? So I didn't know where to start. Used a couple of different automated tools, and I learned a lot along the way. Some of those things that I learned through this process was learning from my own mistakes and learning from the mistakes of the designers that came before me, and they allowed me to kind of identify some of these issues so that I can avoid them and I can make better choices kind of going forward. So it gave me a really good basis for this talk. It also taught me a lot about the difference between legal accessibility and what I like to call actual accessibility. Right? Probably most of us in this room didn't wake up this morning and start looking forward to this talk because we wanted to make sure our websites were legally compliant, right? We mostly care about actual accessibility. But our employers care about legal accessibility. Our employers care about the bottom line. Not having an accessible website means they can get sued, which means loss of business and loss of profit for them, right? So there is a difference, it's a subtle difference. Mostly they kind of work in parallel, but there are a few differences that I learned along the way, which I'll expound later on in the process in the talk, which I promise I will get to in a moment. So epilogue, left there, got a job at Amazon AWS, Can't talk a lot about what I do at Amazon AWS, but I do have one fun fact about Amazon AWS that I'll get to in a moment, some hot goss from Amazon. But I'm going to go into just a few of the practical tips that I've learned along the way. Awesome. Okay. First one is about color contrast and contrast ratios. So like I said, in grad school, I was taught, do good contrast, right? It's good for everyone. Everyone wants to be able to read their own website. And what I come to find out as through this journey is color contrast is actually the most common problem in accessibility on the web today. I also learned that there is an actual definition of what makes good contrast. It's not just, yeah, make sure you look at it and if it looks good, then it's fine. There are contrast ratios. These are a couple of them. They're a little bit more complex than this, but I tried to break it down to its smaller parts. You want, between two colors, you want to make sure there is a 4.5 to 1 contrast between normal text and the background that it sits on. And if we're talking about larger text, or if we're talking about UI elements, then that ratio is a little smaller, it's 3 to 1. So large text is typically about 24 pixels or so. It's converted from points, but it's about 24 pixels. One workaround when you're looking at larger text is if you go above that threshold, you can get away from it from a legal point of view. This is one of the differences, right? It's like not actual accessibility there. You're really not doing any favors for your disabled users at that point. But from a legal perspective, you can kind of get away with it. When we talk about UI elements are any non-text elements, okay? So form input fields, radio buttons, those kind of things. Elements that allow users to do things but aren't necessarily text. When it comes to things like rules and things that are more decorative, we're not really worried about that. But elements that users actually have to interact with, that's what counts as a UI element. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples. Calculating the ratios is difficult. It's a mathematical calculation based on color. So it's not really something any of us can do unless we're on some really good psychedelics. For the rest of us, we are reliant on tools. There's lots of different tools for lots of different platforms. I understand that there's a Chrome browser extension, there is a Figma plugin that you can use, but my favorite tool is webaim.org's contrast checker. Has anyone here used webaim.org before? Yeah, see a few hands? Excellent. It's an awesome tool. Okay, so let's say we're looking at this button. This is a good example of good contrast. All right, so we've got white on blue. And if you go to webaim.org, it's really simple. You can just put in your hex colors for the two colors that you're using, and it'll spit out a ratio. Then it will tell you if you're passed or failed based on a number of different elements and requirements. It also has this really cool slider. So if you put your brand colors in there and you're like just a little off, you can use this slider to figure out how you can get back on course and make sure that you're in compliance. Then you can bring that to your branding people using this permalink function and say, hey, look, we're not quite there, but if we just go a little bit more to this hex color, we can make it. So let's look at an example of what we consider bad contrast, right? Now we're below our 4.5 to 1 ratio at 1.97. This is an orange button. Orange is notoriously tricky for contrast. Not a lot of colors go with it and deliver enough contrast. So this is a bad, example of bad contrast. As I mentioned, you can tell that right here. A couple of other interesting things here. When we talk about legal accessibility versus actual accessibility, and we talk about UI elements versus text. Technically, here, this text on this background counts as text or link text, so you want to use the 4.5 to 1 ratio. It's also a UI element. So this color here, this orange, you actually also want to check out the contrast between the button and the background. This is the hot goss from AWS. We actually just made a change to our orange buttons. We had orange buttons with white text and, as I mentioned, not great contrast. So we're actually changing our color to, and still keeping the orange button, that's our branding, but we're going to black text. It's a good compromise. It meets accessibility requirements. It also meets branding requirements. It's not particularly cute, in my opinion, but nobody asked me. So that's the hot goss. Okay, another practical tip is your heading structure. So people that use screen readers use the heading levels to understand the structure of the content. They can actually scan through the different headings to find the information that they need. So first of all, it's important to have good heading structure. As Chris and Harris mentioned, when we met for drinks a couple weeks ago, if you have good heading structure or heading structure at all, you're kind of ahead of the curve, so that's a good thing. But if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, if you really want to meet that legal requirement, you want to make sure that you don't do one thing. You can always go down a level, go H1, H2, H3, H4, no problem. You can repeat your header level. You can do another H4, no problem. Then you can go back up. You go H4, H4, H2, no problem. Where you get into trouble is when you skip levels, okay? So, for example, H1, H2, H4. No good, you just skipped a header level. Here again, H2, H5, H5. Don't do that. Avoid it the best that you can. Now, most UX designers are probably saying, like, no kidding, why would you go from 2 to 5? That doesn't make any sense. But normally when we get into trouble with this is things more like callouts or modals or things where, it's like a little thing in the corner and it just would look so perfect with an H4, right? According to the letter of the law, can't do that. If you really want to, I'm going to teach you a neat little workaround. If you are the type of UX designer that does your own code, you can do this. If not, engage your engineer, your developer. They can actually style the headers so that they, in HTML, are the correct header structure, but they can apply some CSS style to style that heading to make it look like the other smaller headers on your page. So that's a workaround. One last practical tip. Link text. So we have our 2 articles here. We have the screaming hairy armadillos and our southern bent-toed geckos. Both real things. Look them up for this talk. And let's talk a little bit more actually about this side of the wrong point of view, which, and this is the problem here, is this learn more link, right? You learn more, learn more. First of all, it's not good UX. You need to have better information sent. Learn more, and when you're scanning, is not going to really tell you what you're going to get when you click that link. So a much better description would be something like this: learn more about screaming hairy armadillos. Okay? But you've got another problem. This is where the accessibility problem comes in. You cannot use the same link text to go to different places on the same page. Right? So that's where we run into problems here. Hypothetically, these two are going to different articles, but they have the exact same text, so that a non-sighted user or disabled user may have trouble, when they don't have that full visual context. They're using screen readers or what have you, they're not going to be able to have that same context to figure out what goes to where or where they're going to, so they probably won't click your link and you will lose them. There are some times that you can't get away from the learn more, right? All good UX designers would want to do the long, drawn-out version, but if we're talking about mobile, if we're talking a really tight grid, you just don't have that amount of space. So again, there is a nice little workaround, and that is what became my best friend during a lot of this, which is ARIA label. So ARIA label is something that you can apply to these kind of links. So you can have on the screen, learn more. However, ARIA label allows the screen readers to pick up a different label, which you can kind of program, or your engineer developer can program. They can even do something tricky and say, learn more about, insert bracket here, and pull in your headline. So they can make it actually easy on them and easy on you. So it's a win. So thank you all very much for listening. I really appreciate it. I want to take this to more UX designers, and to do that, I need your help. So I really would like to hear any other practical tips that you all can provide to me so that I can continue to elongate this list and continue to provide practical UX examples. So thanks again to Chris and Harris for having me. Thank you all for coming, and I appreciate it.
Cool. Well, thank you, Adam. Thanks everybody for your attention. We hope you enjoyed the talks. Let's see what time we got. Yeah, we still have time. I don't know when they're gonna kick us out, but if we stay and order drinks and food, yeah. stick around, hang out, network. We'll be here for a little bit, and thanks again for coming, and chat with us again if you want to do some speaking in the future.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that. Come talk to us if you want to speak. Like Chris said, we have a few books to give out. If you do want to just even half-ass commit to talking at some time in the future, that'd be awesome. So come up and say hi. I apologize personally. We usually have name tags, but I left them in the car that I got dropped off in. So introduce yourselves to each other. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Bye live stream.